The air in the low country tonight is thick enough to swallow a secret hole, heavy with the scent of plowed earth and the salt mist creeping in from the marshes. You see, darling, people here like to tell themselves the South is a simple room with only two chairs, one for the black and one for the white, but they've forgotten the very floor they're standing on. The soil under our fingernails is indigenous, a foundational layer of soul that was here long before the first plantation was ever surveyed. If you listen close to the cicadas, they aren't just buzzing, they are chanting the names of the first inhabitants, rhythms that the Cherokee and the Muskogee left behind like echoes in a hollow cypress log. We speak of Dr. King as if his dream was a solo performance. But history is a fusion movement, a term our own Reverend Dr. William Barber uses to remind us that justice is never a lonely business. Back in the late 1950s, when the humidity in Alabama felt like a physical weight, Chief Calvin McGee of the Porch Band of Creek Indians looked at his people and saw a mirror of the struggle in Birmingham. There was a cruelty in the schoolhouse doors back then. If a Creek child was light-skinned, they might slide into a white seat, but the darker-born siblings were cast into colored schools or left on the side of the road with no bus to carry 'em. Chief McGee, a man with a gaze as steady as an ancient river, reached out to Dr. King. They forged a quiet, powerful alliance that the history books tend to whisper about, if they mention it at all. Dr. King didn't just send a letter, he stepped into the fray, arguing that the dignity of an indigenous child was sewn into the same cloth as the dignity of a black child. Long before the ink was dry on the Civil Rights Act of 1964, those children in South Alabama won the right to ride integrated buses together, a tri-racial victory born from two leaders realizing they were fighting the same monster under different names. You taste the indigenous South every time you sit down to a Sunday dinner, though we've been taught to call it soul food. Long before the Europeans arrived with their iron pots, the tribes of the Southeast had perfected the art of nixtamalization, soaking corn in wood ash to give us the grace of hominy and grits. That slow boiling of beans with fat, the frying of cornmeal we call hush puppies, those aren't just recipes, they are survivals. Even our maps are a linguistic tribute to the ghosts. Mississippi is the great river spoken through Ojibwe trade routes. Alabama is the Choctaw and Creek word for thicket clearers. And Tennessee is an echo of the Cherokee village Tanasi. Our famed Southern hospitality isn't just a manners book invention. It's a remnant of the Mississippian mound builder social structures, where a leader's worth was measured by how much they could give back to the community during the green corn ceremony. But the South is also a place of survival myths and shadows on the porch. You'll hear many a white family claim a full-blooded Cherokee princess in their lineage, a story told to root themselves to a land they took, or to explain away a complexion that the one-drop rule would have otherwise condemned. There were no princesses in the egalitarian matrilineal clans of the Cherokee, sugar. That was just a socially acceptable shield. In black families, too, the mention of high cheekbones or good hair was often a way to honor a perceived native heritage while navigating the treacherous waters of Jim Crow. It was a way to survive, to claim a noble ancestry to avoid the shame white supremacy tried to leach into blackness. Yet, if you want to see the true fire of black indigenous solidarity, you must look to the swamps of Florida during the Second Seminole War. It was the largest and most successful slave rebellion this country ever saw, a joint uprising where the Seminole, the black Seminoles, known as Maroons, and escaped plantation slaves became a single, inseparable fist. Leaders like John Horse and Abraham, a former slave who became the top advisor to Chief Micanopy, terrified the U.S. government. They destroyed 21 of the largest sugar plantations, the Silicon Valley of that era's economy, proving that blacks and Indians were one. It got so fierce that General Jessup had to promise freedom to any black person who would agree to be removed west, the only time the federal government granted emancipation to rebellious slaves before the Civil War. Some of those warriors, the Masgogos, eventually fled across the border to Mexico, where their descendants still live today, a living testament to a defiance that wouldn't be broken. Now, here in 2026, the struggle has shifted from the plantation to the nation-to-nation relationship. We've seen the Lumbee tribe finally secure their federal recognition, a victory decades in the making. But the battle for sovereignty is a different beast than the fight for citizenship. While the black struggle often seeks equality within the American promise, the indigenous struggle is for the right to remain distinct, to be governed by tribal law rather than the whims of state legislators. We see it in the MMIW movement, missing and murdered indigenous women, where a red handprint painted over a mouth speaks for those the jurisdictional gaps have silenced. We see it in the reclamation of two-spirit identities, a decolonizing of the heart that honors non-binary roles, which were sacred here long before the settlers imported their narrow views of gender. The tragedy is that the world wants to view indigenous people as a monolith, a Plains Indian in a feathered headdress frozen in the 1800s. That authenticity trap is a cage for the southern tribes like the Catawba or the Whack-A-Mole Sioux. Because they don't live in teepees or fit a Hollywood silhouette, they're often treated as ghosts or fake by law enforcement and ICE agents who ignore their tribal IDs. But they aren't ghosts, darling. They are the soil of the South, standing in the crosshairs of environmental injustice and the fight for land back. They understand that the colonial tree has many branches, surveillance, erasure, and displacement, but they all grow from the same bitter root. In the South, we are all relations, and until every branch is recognized, the tree will never truly bloom. I tell you that in this low country, the past is not a ghost. It is a tenant that has never missed a month's rent. We are a people who do not see history as a straight line marching towards some glittering tomorrow. No, sugar, here history is a circle, a logic of the soil that binds us to the red clay and the brackish marsh until we cannot tell where our own skin ends and the land begins. To be Southern is to carry a dual citizenship of the soul. We are Americans by law, but we are creatures of this region by blood and by memory. We feel like cultural outsiders to the rest of the world, standing at the edge of the party, defensive of our accents and our slow-cooked secrets, yet fiercely proud of a resilience that was forged in the fires of the civil rights movement and the ancient survival of the tribes. My own family tree is a tangled thicket, overgrown with legends and hushed warnings. They used to boast about indigenous blood with a sort of wild, romantic pride, yet in the very next breath they'd warn me never to dig too deep into the genealogy. Don't go looking for surprises in the woodpile, they'd say, their voices dropping an octave. I've never taken a DNA test, and I don't intend to. I don't claim a seat at the tribal table, and I don't check a box on a form to gain a cent of social currency. But I will tell you this, believing that I am a piece of that southern gray zone, that complex web of black, white, and native survival has been the steady north star of my moral compass. You see, when you grow up believing that the person being harassed by a badge at the border or the person whose ancestors survived the Middle Passage might just be your literal kin, justice stops being an abstract lecture and becomes a personal debt. It is what sociologists might call kinship expansion, but I just call it being a stakeholder in humanity. If we are partly them, then the rigid hierarchies of the Old South crumble like dry rot. I choose to let this lore be my heritage, a private hearth fire that warms my liberal views and my empathy, without letting it become a public identity I haven't earned. It is a third-generation recovery. What my ancestors might have hidden or suppressed just to survive the cruelties of Jim Crow, I now hold up to the light as a reason to stand in solidarity with every marginalized soul. By holding this story close but keeping my hands off the title, I am trying to honor the truth of the region without being an appropriator of its pain. I am a witness to the history, not the owner of it. Most folks either lie to claim a status for gain, or they dismiss the old stories as white people miss to avoid the missiness of it all. I prefer this middle path. It's a way of unflattening the South, acknowledging that we aren't just a binary of black and white, but a kaleidoscope of survival that doesn't need to look like a Hollywood movie to be real. It's the highest form of allyship I know, to look at the struggle for equality and say, because I believe we are connected, your fight is my fight. No certificate of blood quantum required. We are just chapters in a very long, very complicated book, and I am determined to make my chapter one of kindness.
The crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women is an epidemic hidden in plain sight. In 2016 alone, the National Crime Information Center reported 5,712 cases of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls, yet a staggering number of these cases never make it into federal databases or national news cycles. On some tribal lands, Indigenous women are murdered at rates more than 10 times the national average, and homicide remains the third leading cause of death for Native women. These are not just numbers. They are our mothers, daughters, and sisters, warrior women who have carried the strength of their ancestors only to be met with a silence that is as systemic as it is lethal. This lack of justice is fueled by a legacy of oppression and discrimination that treats Indigenous lives as disposable. For centuries, colonial policies have marginalized Native voices, leading to a data crisis where victims are often misclassified or ignored by non-tribal law enforcement. This is compounded by a jurisdictional legal maze created by the U.S. government, which often strips tribal nations of the authority to prosecute non-native offenders on their own lands. When a warrior woman goes missing, her family is often forced to navigate a confusing patchwork of federal, state, and tribal agencies that lack the funding, communication, or political will to provide answers. We must bridge these gaps and dismantle this systemic indifference that allows perpetrators to act with impunity. To learn more about the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women through non-federal and tribal-focused lenses, please see the video information for a list of websites.